for us. So I'm with the Mount Tabor Neighborhood Association. You're in Mount Tabor. Some of you grew up in Mount Tabor, or you're have some history here or may still live here, but we're all part of the community together, and I have to say, after living here 30 years, this is the first time I have been in this building. So you've already made connection here for me, awesome. And I really appreciate the invitation. I'll just say a little bit about myself. I grew up in Seattle, met my wife at graduate school at University of Washington. We moved to Olympia and worked for state government for a couple of years. We couldn't afford to buy a place in Seattle. We had friends in Portland. It was cheaper here, still is. And so we moved to Portland, 1994. And I got involved with the Neighborhood Association shortly after that. I was concerned about billboard structures. That was my issue at the time, and I was looking for some help with that. So maybe I can just say the Neighborhood Association, Portland has a citywide system of neighborhood associations. They're independent nonprofits. They are not part of city government, but they are recognized by city government. And in the 1970s, the city council passed an ordinance that established the system where the city could then recognize neighborhood associations across the city, and it would be part of like a two-way communication between community and government. But neighborhood associations are independent nonprofits. It's all volunteer, and neighborhoods under city code can work on anything that affects the livability of their neighborhood. So it's a very broad mandate. It's whatever community members want to work on. So
it seems like some neighborhood associations may be more active than others, or is that the case? It seems like Mount Tabor Neighborhood Association is very active and has a big presence in the area.
It's like faith communities. It's like any kind of groupings of humans that get together. Some have more skills and more energy at different times than others. So right now there are 94 neighborhood associations across Portland. And Dave, as you were saying, they sometimes go through cycles. They're really based on human capital. It's who's there, what skills and energy they bring. And so it ebbs and flows. But right now Mount Tabor is one of the more active and effective neighborhoods.
Okay. I like that answer. That's a good answer. You know, I appreciate it because Polly and I used to walk the neighborhood quite a bit before COVID, and we ran into this thing called the Canoe Museum.
Oh, yeah.
And you probably didn't even know there was one in this neighborhood, but there's a canoe museum in this neighborhood, and it's awesome. We spent about a half an hour there looking at all the handmade canoes and kayaks and things, and interesting things in this neighborhood. Not just the Mount Tabor and the reservoirs. There's other things besides that's right. Happening around here. What are some of the biggest issues or types of projects that the association deals with?
Well, neighborhood associations, again, deal with whatever community members are concerned about. So our neighborhood in the past has been very involved for 20 years on the reservoirs issue, the big reservoirs in Mount Tabor Park, and the city sometimes wanting to do things with the reservoirs that weren't necessarily in line with what community members were hoping for there. But we get involved in traffic safety is another issue. Residents up on Thorburn, I don't know if you've been on Thorburn, it's really windy and people used to love to drive really fast there. It's also on a very steep hill, so there were spectacular crashes and cars going off the cliff into other people's yards. And so they got together and came to the neighborhood for help. How can we get speed bumps or traffic calming? So we mentored them and worked with them, and they raised money on Thorburn to actually have the city put in traffic calming there, and the safety's gotten much, much better. We've worked with Friends of Mount Tabor Park. That was created partly out of big fights in the past over dog off leash use. So, you know, hundreds of people, angry people would come to meetings for that. We've done lots of different fun events, like with Warner Pacific University, we would do the movies in the park, and it was Friends of the Park, Mount Tabor Neighborhood, South Tabor, and Warner Pacific, and we would have like 400 people come in the summer and watch a movie out there. We just did our big neighborhood cleanup with North North Tabor Neighborhood Association and Unity Church on Stark. They let us use their parking lot. A bunch of their church members came and helped out. So again, just like what you guys are doing, reaching out, there's capacity in our community. There's skill sets, there's knowledge, there's energy, there are problems. When we cross these divides and start to work together, we can really help each other. And I think that's been a big part of the focus for the neighborhood. It's whatever the hot issue, just like a few weeks ago, the Park Bureau was taking down historic lampposts in parks all over the city, but they hadn't talked to anybody about it. They just thought it was a good idea. So we helped community members organize. Mount Tabor is a historically designated park, and there's all sorts of studies that have been done about what replacement lampposts should look like. Well, the city staff didn't know about that, but we did. So we were able to share that.
It's good. It's good to have advocates on your side.
Yeah, and I just want to say that's one thing we really do is if you've got a key principle of community engagement is people should have a voice in decisions that affect them. This is around the globe, people who work with community engagement, that's a fundamental principle. And so if you've got something going on, if you can get help and get organized, what's the nature of your issue, who might be able to help you, who has power over that issue. We do lots of that advocacy 101 kind of training. So if you guys have an issue or something you want to work on, we'd be happy to help you think through that. That's another thing the neighborhood does.
Excellent, excellent. Let's go on here. What are some actions individuals can take to promote and develop a better neighborhood and community?
Well, and I think this connecting is really important. Like Brent from the congregation here, when we got ownership of the property where next to the old Dairy Queen, it had been a little mini mart. The guy was selling pseudoephedrine to meth labs and cigarettes to minors and all sorts of stuff. And so one day, there was a knock on my door and there was a TV camera and a reporter, and they said, "What do you think about what's going on down the street?" Because I just live a few houses from this site. And I said, "What's going on?" And the place was crawling with black SUVs, and the US Marshals had been surveilling the site for 3 years from the teacher's lounge in Atkinson across the street, swept the guy up, and he ended up going to prison, I think, for 11 years. But then the federal government seized the property because it was a drug property, and we were able to get ownership of that and turn it into a community-based facility. But we needed plumbing help, and Brent from the congregation here is a plumber, and he came and did all the plumbing for free, and the congregation here raised the money for his plumbing supplies. So there are concrete things you can do when you see needs in the community to help out. Going to other groups' events is a great way to sort of gain legitimacy and show interest and respect to other groups. Finding fun volunteer projects, like there's the Weed Warriors up in Mount Tabor Park, where they regularly are up there pulling weeds in the park, if that's what you like to do. There's volunteering for the schools. There's just tons of stuff to do. But the key is to get out of your sort of inner circle, your family, your friends that you see all the time, and we're like you were saying, sort of put your toe out there, get into things that maybe you're not as familiar with or comfortable. That's when you start developing the human relationships that build your ability to have an effect in the community. And as I think you were saying, Dave, it's healthier to be connected. Scientific studies show that if we're connected with other people, we're happier and we live longer. And I think we have a lot of contentiousness in our society right now, people feeling contempt for each other, that people are just irredeemable. Scientifically, you will live less long if you feel that kind of contempt than if you feel connected and joyful with others. So I think, again, find things to volunteer, go to other people's events. If you have an issue, ask for help, see who else might be interested. How can you help? A servant mentality is one that we really encourage. We're here not to fix you or whatever, we're here to serve you and we're partner with you. So I think those are all approaches. Just getting out and connecting with others is really important.
How do we reach out to the neighborhood association? Where do we go? What do we do? Do we call Pastor Caitlin and say, "Hey, can you call Paul for me?" Or
Yes,
what can we do?
That's one way. with the neighborhood association, most neighborhood associations, we have contact email. It's mtna.contact@gmail.com. We also have a listserv that if you sign up for that listserv, you get emails whenever we send out announcements. There's a Mount Tabor Google group that if you get on, there's some 300 some people on the Google group. Lots of information goes around, people asking for stuff, offering stuff, sharing information. These are all sort of network ways to connect with the neighborhood association. We also have our monthly meetings. It's the third Wednesday of every month except December. We're still doing them on Zoom. We're trying to figure out how to do the hybrid stuff. And you can always contact Pastor Weekly or contact me, Google the neighborhood association. We often get people contacting us with questions, and then we start working with them. We had one woman moved to the neighborhood last summer. She came to her first neighborhood association meeting, and we asked her what kind of things would be interesting to you. She said, well, I'm a new resident. It'd be interesting to get new residents together. And so we said, would you like to work on that with us? And so she helped she has a marketing background, and we did this really fun new resident meetup in October 1st at the Western Seminary, again, another one of our community partners. We had 30 people come who were new to the neighborhood, and we got to hear from them on what they're interested in, what they care about, and make that connection. So that's a long answer.
You have a website too?
We have a website. If you just Google Mount Tabor Neighborhood Association, it'll pop up.
Facebook?
We have some social media stuff. It's not that well, kept
Those
up.
are places that somebody could go to either get a number or to find out how to further reach you or the association.
Exactly.
Excellent. Love that. Let's go on to our last question here.
Okay.
What are some bigger scale changes that you think could provide a healthier and happier community?
Yes, that's an excellent question, especially I think during our troubled times. And like I was saying before, and like you, Dave, you've already been saying, it's about community. It's about building community and getting out of the isolation. We crave that as human beings. We want the social connection. People do not most people do not feel comfortable with conflict. They would much rather get along and do positive, constructive things together. So I'm reading a book right now about some of these issues, and one of the things they said is, even if you don't feel it, to smile and engage with people in a way that you would like to feel that you could engage with them, and that scientifically it's shown if you smile, you will be happier. So sometimes our actual moods catch up with our actions. But for us, in the neighborhood system, it's very much about getting people just involved in things, fun events, discussion groups in the community, volunteer projects, again, getting people into the cycle of engagement with others, but then also building leadership skills. Maybe you were born with leadership skills, but most of us are not. And so to learn to be a leader, what does that mean and how do you do it? And those skills develop over time. I hope I'm not outing you, but Pastor Weekly and I were both deathly afraid of public speaking when we were little kids.
Same here.
I think we've overcome it. You have. Well, okay. But again, build your leadership skills, and part of that is being kind to yourself. None of us know how to do any of this stuff. We all learn from doing. So try things out. Take on additional responsibilities. Build your skills as a leader, because then you can also be a mentor to other people who are trying to raise up. Help your organizations, whether it's your faith community, other nonprofits that you're in, learn skills. Help that organization be a successful organization and do its community work. Again, build your skills, build your knowledge, build your relationships. But then the third piece is, so strong organizations, but when organizations connect to each other, again, exactly what you guys are doing here, we're so much more powerful when we all work together. And so that's very encouraging. We also deal a lot with local government because local government has a lot of power. And so helping local government leaders and staff actually work in positive relationship with the community. Traditional governance is a top-down parent-child relationship. Government is the parent, we're the children. That is not a healthy way to manage in society. And so what we really work to do is a co-governance kind of model where it's an adult-adult relationship between the community and government. Because we can do a lot of great work by ourselves out here in the community, but if we're not tapping into where there's power and making sure that community members have a voice, we're not going to be as effective. So I think those are important pieces for us. Getting involved in the community in any way, building your skills as a leader, building your skills as being a part of an organization, linking to other organizations, but then speaking truth to power and learning how to engage with people in power and people who have power so that you're able to help some of that power move out here into the community where part of it should be.
That's great. Paul, this is wonderful information, and it just brings all together this aspect of community and reaching out and working together, collaborating. And thank you so much. Any parting words or any advice you'd like to leave us with as we go on with the rest of the program?
Just again, like, this is the first, I drive by this place almost every day, and this is the first time I've been in here. It's because you invited me to be in here with you, and now we've started to develop a relationship together, and we can do things together that we couldn't have done before when we didn't really know each other. So I think this whole approach that you're using of connecting with the community is extremely powerful, and it's fun. Yeah. It's much more fun than some of the stuff we see in the news because you're here doing positive stuff that makes a difference. So I encourage you to keep going, and we want to partner with you.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay.
That was fantastic. Thank you for sharing with us today. So, wasn't that great? Makes you just want to be more part of the community and do more, and just brings more light to our Community Fun Day that we're having. When are we having our Community Fun Day? September when? September 17th. Mark your calendars. It's going to be another awesome fun day. We also have another fun thing that we do each evening. We give away a prize. Tonight, we also have another great prize. We're going to do it again tonight, and Lucy's going to bring me up some names here that we're going to draw out of a bowl. We have the same great book that our famous and illustrious prize winner from last night won, Jeannie Collins. If you want to know more about the book, you can ask her. Same great book, Timothy Keller, King's Cross. And you can actually have this book. Nice hardback cover on it. Let's see if we can get a name here. Jeannie Collins. Oh. Sophia. Yes, come on up. Well, no, actually stay there. We'll take it to you. Enjoy it. Thank you. Isn't that exciting? We'll do that again tomorrow night. You may have a chance to win that same book tomorrow night. So as you know, Pastor Caitlin has been wonderful. We all know that. But her background, her achievements already so far in her young career have really placed her here in the right place, I believe, has brought her to this neighborhood, to this church, for the right reasons at the very right times. I don't think I need to introduce her very much more because you already know more about that. Is there anything I can add to this list that's about you? Is there something that nobody in this room knows about you? She's checking to see who's in the room. She can whistle through her hands. Do you want to see this?
Did anyone know that?
See? Pastor Caitlin, thanks again. I don't think I need to introduce you anymore. You're great. We look forward to hearing what you have to say tonight. Yes.
Suddenly there was a commotion in the temple. The greatest and most pious spiritual leaders came running in, dragging a woman in their midst. She was terrified. And while she was held tightly by her arms and being pushed from behind, she tried her best to squirm out of the men's grasp. In one hand, she was holding a cloak, desperately trying to pull as much of it over her as she could to hide her nakedness. The crowd that had gathered around to hear Jesus speak, well, they began to turn their heads, of course, at this commotion, and they were torn between watching the spectacle and averting their gaze from the scandalous sight. In the end, curiosity won out, and all eyes fell upon this group, pushing its way into the center of the temple complex. With a final shove, a priest pushed the woman onto the dusty ground right in front of Jesus' feet. "Teacher!" The word cut through the commotion and the sound of the woman sobbing. The leader of the pack, a tall Pharisee with spotless robes, stepped forward to address Jesus. He wore a smile unsuited for the spectacle taking place. All eyes were on him as he pointed at the woman on the ground. "This woman has been caught committing the sin of adultery." Stifled gasps could be heard throughout the crowd. The woman visibly shrunk inside herself, trying with all her might to disappear, though she was afforded no such luxury. "Teacher," the Pharisee continued, "you know the law of Moses. It commands that anyone caught in the act of adultery must be stoned to death. So, what do you think her fate should be?" All eyes flashed over to Jesus. The tension was palpable. It was true. The law of Moses had been handed down from God himself, and it stated that anyone who committed adultery must be put to death. At least, that had been the instruction. But no one could remember any instance when this had actually been done. For one, there had to be proof. There had to be witnesses to the act, and that was hard to produce. But second, if an issue of adultery did come before a judge these days, the matter was often settled through finances, not bloodshed. But here was the conundrum. You see, the woman had been caught. There was evidence. There were clearly witnesses. Would Jesus follow the law of Moses? If he truly was the Son of God, as he claimed to be, surely he had to make sure that the law was strictly adhered to. But on the other hand, Jesus had built up his name upon the kindness and mercy that he showed outcasts and sinners. So when push came to shove, would Jesus abandon this character of mercy that he'd shown to his followers? Time seemed to stand still. The priests wore tentative smiles, waiting to see how Jesus would respond to this trap. The tall Pharisee, who was in the front of the group, he held this air of triumph as he stared down this new teacher. The woman stayed exactly where she was, hiding behind her long hair, her quiet sniffles the only sound in the temple courtyard, as everyone waited to see what would happen next. But Jesus didn't say anything. Instead, he got down on his knees, several feet away from the woman. He didn't reach towards her to comfort her, but he didn't reach to strike her either. And instead, the crowd watched as Jesus carefully moved his finger through the dirt. This was not the reaction anyone was expecting. With furrowed brow, the Pharisee leader stepped forward to see what Jesus was doing. The rest of the priests tentatively stepped forward as well, and the gathered crowd stood on tiptoe, craning their necks to see what was going on. Well, after a few minutes of this, of Jesus silently drawing in the dirt, the tall Pharisee could not stand it. "Stop ignoring me. Answer my question. What should be done with this adulterous woman?" Jesus sighed, and he stood up, apparently as bothered by this man as he would be by a pesky mosquito. He stared into the eyes of the Pharisee for a moment before casting his gaze around the circle. "If someone here has never sinned, please throw the first stone at this woman." And then, without waiting for any answer, Jesus got back down on the ground and continued what he was doing. With Jesus' answer, immediately the crowd looked over to the group of priests. How would they respond to this? Would they, in fact, pick up stones and begin to throw them? They must be sinless, after all. They were the religious leaders. They couldn't be sinners. But as the crowd looked at the priests looked at the ground, where Jesus was doodling in the dirt, except they weren't doodles. Jesus was writing a long list of sins: deceit, extortion, dishonoring family, theft, adultery. Why would Jesus write this? A few of the priests began to nervously clear their throats. With faces quickly turning red, they began to back away from the circle of people. It began to dawn on the rest of the crowd. Jesus was suggesting that these very men, these holy men, had committed these sins. But rather than argue back with Jesus, the religious leaders just slipped into the crowd, walking away one by one. Jesus had asked for those who had never sinned to throw the first stone, but no stones were being thrown. The tall Pharisee glowered, staring at the ground where Jesus continued to write. He was clearly fuming inside, but didn't know what to do. Finally, with a huff, he stormed away. The crowd watched him go and then turned their attention back to Jesus and the woman. Jesus stopped his writing, and he looked at her. Her crying had ceased. She hesitantly pulled her hair back to meet Jesus' gaze. He smiled. And then, looking around almost comically, he asked, Where did they go? Is no one going to condemn you?" Quietly, she replied, "I don't think so." Jesus nodded and stood up. The crowd watched in amazement as Jesus reached out his hand to the woman and helped her to her feet. "Well, I'm not going to condemn you either," he said kindly. "Please, leave your sin in the past." She smiled at the man who had shown her mercy. A wave of relief swept over the woman, the only man who had never sinned, and the only man worthy to pass righteous judgment on her. This man who had seen her for who she was and offered her the compassion she had always needed. Throughout history, for centuries, Christians, religious leaders, churches have been picking up stones and throwing them. It's not hard to find when you look through history books. Sometimes these actions have happened because genuine wrongs have taken place. The woman really did commit adultery. But sometimes stones are thrown when there is no wrong. We see both of these take place throughout history. We see crusades where Christians went to war and killed millions of people under the guise of religion. but for the sake of politics. We see centuries of using Scripture to support the idea of owning and mistreating other human beings. We see Christian schools for indigenous students where children were abused, neglected, and even killed, all for the name of Christ. Christians who protest funerals of those who have died from HIV and AIDS. The list, unfortunately, goes on and on. The odds are that you yourself or someone that you know has received a blow in the name of Christianity. When I was young, when I was a child, my parents worked at the coolest place. Now, you might think that I'm exaggerating, but I give you I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a cooler location. My parents worked at a game company. And when I got to go to work with my parents, yes, got to, I could go into a game room and I could play Nintendo and I could play ping pong. And if I got hungry, I could go down the hall to the company kitchen and I could find popcorn that was available for free. And when I turned on the tap in the sink, I could get root beer. That is a fact. It was the coolest place. I loved it. And it was a game company. They made games. I got to play games with my family. This was how I grew up. It was beautiful and it was wonderful. And I would love it when my parents had to work overtime because I got to go in with them and have a great time. The company would have company-wide Nerf wars, and all the families would come together and play giant games of Nerf, and it was amazing. I loved it so much. I also grew up in a church. I went to church when I was as tiny could be, and I loved going to our Bible studies. I loved going to Sabbath schools on Sabbath mornings, and I enjoyed spending time with my church family. But something strange happened that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me when I was a kid. You see, my parents were such wonderful individuals. They wanted to help out with our church community. My mom wanted to assist in the children's ministry. My dad wanted to help out as well. And when the time came for offering up your name to say, yes, I would like to help lead a ministry, I'd like to be a part of this, they put their names in and said, yes, we want to help our church. And they were denied. And that was a shock because they loved Jesus, and every night my parents would sit down with my brother and I, and we'd have family worship, and I couldn't understand why they would not be allowed to help in church. And it turned out that there were some members of this church who felt very concerned about the place where my parents worked. You see, the game company that they worked for is a company called Wizards of the Coast, which produced a game called Magic the Gathering and Pokemon and other such card games and other games that made some people nervous. And even though my mother worked in HR and my dad worked in shipping, they were concerned what kind of an influence people who would work at this sort of a company might have upon our church. And so they were kindly asked to withdraw their names from being leaders at our church. This took a toll on my family, on my parents. They loved their jobs. They loved this place. They loved the work. They had great benefits. They had great pay. They worked with great friends. And yet, when they would go to church, they felt like they were not accepted. And so after having worked there for several years, my parents decided that they would leave their jobs. And as soon as they left their jobs, they were welcomed to take on leadership positions at the church. The same people the same individuals, the same hearts. I was only a kid when that happened, and my parents did as best a job as they could to kind of shield my brother and I from the church politics of what was going on. But I still felt it. I still knew that I couldn't talk about this thing that I thought was so cool. Because if I talked about it, then people would know that I was bad. This was the message that I got from church as I was growing up. In 1 Peter 5:8, there is an amazing text. If you have your Bibles or Bible apps, you're welcome to read along with me. We'll also have it up on the screen here. In 1 Peter 5:8, we read this instruction: be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. You know, we expect to see the devil working outside Christianity. We don't always expect to see the devil working within the church. And yet, if I were to be Satan and I wanted to find a way to draw a wedge between God and his people, what better way than under the guise of religion? There has been a lot of harm done under the guise of Christianity, under the guise of the church, that is far from the reality of who Christ is. There is a lot of harm that has been done. Last night, we talked about the concept of these 4 relationships, these relationships that were established in creation. Relationships between man and God, between man and other people, between man and the world, the environment, the earth, and between man and himself. And within religious institutions, we still find these relationships that have been broken, that have been marred by the introduction of sin into our world. A religious institution is still a human institution. When it's comprised of humanity, there's going to be brokenness, which means there's going to be times when we hurt each other. There's times where we experience a brokenness, where Jesus just wants to give us restoration. Sometimes we are hurt in harmful, intentional ways. Sometimes we are hurt in unintentional ways. Tonight, if you are sitting here and thinking about a time or a way in which you have been hurt from a fellow church member, from a religious leader, from what you picked up in church, if there has been a hurt that has been dealt to you in some capacity under the guise of pure Christianity, as a pastor of the Christian faith, I want to apologize. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you felt that. I'm sorry that you experienced that. I'm sorry you endured that hurt, because that is not okay. That is not okay. And I want to apologize. And I want you to know that what hurt you might have experienced under the guise of Christianity is not the reality of who Christ is. He is so much more. There's a misquoted statement that was originally attributed to Mahatma Gandhi. It's been a bit debunked, but I think it's still a powerful sentiment. It says, I like your Christ, I do not like your Christians, because your Christians are not like your Christ. Because we are broken humans, even as we are trying to follow God, you know there's going to be some brokenness along the way. And whenever we rub shoulders with each other, there's going to be opportunity for pain. If you have encountered someone like the Pharisee from our story today. I want you to know that they are not representative of who Jesus truly is. Where the world condemns, Jesus loves. It's a sad reality sometimes, but those of us who claim to follow Jesus, we often fall short. But let's draw a distinct separation between Christ and his followers. We're going to talk more about the followers of Christ on another night, but I want to pivot our conversation tonight to shift and to talk about who Jesus really is. Not the Jesus that is painted in pain, but the Jesus who wants to bring you restoration. At the very start of his ministry, Jesus gives us an idea of who he is all about. This comes to us from the book of Luke. Luke chapter 4. Luke chapter 4, we're going to be looking at verse 16 to 19 to start. This is at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. He has come to earth and he has come to do some stuff. We see this here in verse 16. And he, Jesus, came to Nazareth where he had been brought up. And as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives, recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." This is a prophecy that we find established in the Old Testament. It comes from the book of Isaiah, chapter 61. And here we see Jesus actually claiming this prophecy for himself, that he is the fulfillment of it. And there are 5 key elements here I want us to have a look at. We'll put them up on the screen here. 5 elements that Jesus says he has come into the world to do. He has come to proclaim good news to the poor. He has come to proclaim liberty to the captives, to proclaim recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So, what are these things? What is it that Jesus is saying here? First, to proclaim good news to the poor. Now, I would wager that there's probably at least a few people in here who have felt poor at some point or another. Perhaps it was a crushing load of debt. Perhaps it was being in between jobs. Perhaps it was something even more difficult than that. But Jesus says, I want to proclaim good news. Good news to those who are in need. For those who are stressing about where one end is going to meet the other. For those who are worried about how they will be taken care of. Jesus says, I've got this. He's come to proclaim liberty to the captive, to those who are held in captivity. Not just a literal captivity of one person over another or one person to a state or a condition, but perhaps even captivity to sin itself, captivity to addiction, captivity to fear. Jesus is coming to release you from whatever is holding you captive. And who is it that the blind may be here? Of course, Jesus came, and last night we talked about him literally bringing sight to a blind man. And yes, he wants to bring healing and physical restoration. We know that this is a breakdown in our restoration process as well, in our relationship process. We have physical ailments, and Jesus wants to heal us of these things. And in addition, what are some other areas of blindness that we have? What are we blind to that is going on around us? What ways have we gotten caught in our day-to-day regular trajectory, missing everything else that is important around us? Recover our sight, set at liberty the oppressed. Jesus came to bring equality, to bring equity, to bring compassion, justice for all people. No matter where you're from, no matter your history, your experience, your ethnicity, to set at liberty those who have experienced oppression. And finally, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Now, that one might be a little hard to understand at first. This is a reference to a celebration that God instituted back in Leviticus 25, the year of the Lord's favor, also called the year of Jubilee. God set it up so that it would happen every 50 years, where every 50 years, all of your debts would be canceled. I could use a year of Jubilee. All of your debts would be canceled. All of the land that was worked for agriculture would be let to rest. There would be reconciliation amongst people. It was a great reset of everything so that we can come to a place of rest together as a community, not lording upon one another, but having a space of rejuvenation together. This was meant to be a glimpse of what God intended for his people, not just here in this earth, but in a beautiful future yet to come. And someday all will be made right. So when Jesus shows up and he quotes Isaiah and he says these 5 things, what is it that he's saying? Verse 21, he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." Jesus has come to do these things in your life, in my life. He has come to bring good news, to bring liberty, to bring sight, and to ultimately make the world right. If you have felt like the woman caught in adultery, if you found yourself in places that you don't want to be, if you find yourself in condemnation, if you have been hurt by others, if you have had stones thrown at you, if you have felt left alone to defend yourself, Jesus is for you. Jesus is for you. He has come not to judge, but to bring you into the best of lives, to be free, to be well, to be happy. So let us not let the hatred and condemnation of others prevent us from experiencing Christ. Let us not let the brokenness of others in humanity prevent us from seeing who Jesus really is. Yes, we make mistakes, and also Jesus is the one that we need to have our eyes on the most. And he will never let you down. Instead, he will be the one down beside you when you are feeling at your lowest, when you are feeling condemned and cast aside by the rest of the world. He is there with you. And he says, "Come, leave your sin in the past, but I do not condemn you." Tonight, we are going to have an opportunity to discuss a little bit about the story of the woman caught in adultery and what it means for our lives today. If you were here last night, you know the drill. We're going to come through and pass out some discussion cards for you. And I'd invite you to pair up in pairs of 2, 3, 4, no more than 4. You start, someone gets left out when you get to 5. And take some time discussing these questions together, wrestling with these ideas, digesting this together. And then we'll circle back up after a few minutes. I always hate to interrupt such great conversation and discussion time, and yet I will. I hope that tonight you've been able to have an opportunity to perhaps see God, Jesus, from a slightly different perspective. On our discussion card for tonight, you'll find that there are a couple questions on the back side. If you feel inclined, you're welcome to fill this out, and you can leave it on the desk on your way out. If you feel like you're being tugged at the heart tonight that you would like to learn more about Jesus, that you'd like to learn more about studying Scripture, or perhaps you'd like to speak to a pastor. It doesn't have to be me. If you don't want me, that's okay. We'll find someone else. But if you want to meet with someone, I'd encourage you, go ahead and write your name, mark as such, put a phone number there so we can best contact you, and you can leave that on the table on your way out. Tonight, as we conclude our time together, I want to invite you to put behind you the notion of a God who condemns. Instead, I invite you to embrace a loving, divine being, creator of the universe, who wants nothing more than to send your accusers away, to lift you up off the ground, to pull you into an embrace, to tell you that you are loved beyond measure, no matter what you've done, that nothing you can do will make him love you anymore, make him love you any less. This is the real Jesus who has come to this earth to proclaim the Lord's favor in your life, starting today and forevermore. Will you bow your heads with me in prayer? Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for the truth of who you are, the truth of who your Son is. We thank you for sending Jesus to this earth to bring liberty, good news, to set free those who are held captive, those who are oppressed, to proclaim your favor in this world. We claim that truth, that love, that Jesus. And where there are wounds that have been caused by those in your name, Lord, I pray for healing. I pray for restoration. And I pray that each day you would open our eyes, remove our blindness to see more and more the truth of who you are. I ask this all in your wonderful name. Amen. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. The party continues tomorrow, same time, same place. Tomorrow night, our topic is a broken God. We'll be meeting at 6:30. If you have friends that you'd like to invite, if you have enemies you'd like to invite, we'll take them all. If you know some little kiddos who would love to learn more about Jesus, we've got a great program that's happening at the same time. You're welcome to bring them. They'll do crafts and have snacks and have a wonderful time next door. For now, you're welcome to come and enjoy some refreshments to continue discussing and celebrating Jesus together. Thank you.